start. Welcome to our research seminar. Today the presentation will be given by Sergiy Polyachenko, Junior Research Fellow at the Center for Constitutional Studies. Sergiy will present his research paper, which is a joint work with his colleague, Maxim Bryukhanov. So Sergiy, you're welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to welcome everybody here to listen to my talk. And today I will present a paper which is called Factors of Individual Demand for Government Price Regulation for Price Control, Evidence from RLMS. And yes, really, we do this work jointly with Maxim Bryukhanov. This is kind of work in progress, so we invited you to let you know what we're doing, to hear what do you think about it, and of course to get some feedback and comments from you. So I organized my presentation in the following manner. First of all, I will talk a little bit about motivation of for this paper and literature review. Secondly, I will discuss data we used. Thirdly, I will show some results we got, and finally I will conclude. So I will talk about 30 to 40 minutes, and I hope to fit the time. And of course, you can feel free to interrupt me and address your short questions, but I would rather prefer to get all the questions after I finish. So anyway, before I start, let me address the following question to you. What do you think? Is there high demand for government price control in Russia? Well, it is. So, so far we cannot compare to any other countries, but just looking at the distribution of data and the distribution of answers to questions, which represents demand for government price regulation, we can say that the distribution is skewed to high end, and easily saying that on the scale from 1 to 10, on average, Russians demonstrate 8.5 points of demand for government price control. So, the importance of attitudes in transition was pointed out by Schiller, Boyko, and Korobov, and they express the opinion that attitudes, morals, and understanding of people themselves is the very important barriers to success of free markets. Concerning prices, Sergiy Guryov, with his colleagues in 2008, pointed that in 1991, Russians were choosing between they had and but they didn't want to, and something new, which is we call democracy. But later, being fooled by democracy in pure sense, they didn't want Western type democracy, but rather they wanted something else, which they called specially suited democracy. And I think it's worth to say that this work is a sort of continuation of the research we had with my colleague John Nye. It's published as a working paper in 2013. It's studying individual, which was studying individual characteristics of demand for government regulation and market liberal values. But for this paper, we use newly released data, and we go back to fundamental predictors of demand for government price regulation. So, in the past, studies mostly were considering factors of individual attitudes toward government and social welfare policies, confidence and efficiency of market economy, harmfulness of competition, size of government responsibility, economic efficiency of democracies, government wage control, state control of the firms, state ownership, competition, attitudes, government responsibility, and so forth. But the closest to our research is the paper of Dimitrova-Greizel, which called Government Involvement in Price Regulation to Guarantee Low Price of Basic Food and Gas. So, the research question we are trying to answer in this study, what individual characteristics of RLMS respondents are associated with individual demand for government price control. In order to answer the question, we have to define major group of factors which potentially correlate with demand for government price control, we want also to determine statistically significance of association of covariates with types of individual demand for government price control, and check consistency of our finding with respect to demand for government price control with findings of other studies, also with respect to other attitudes toward government regulation. So, based on wide study of literature and analyzing the works published before, we selected the following set of controls, which potentially should affect, and actually they are found to have an effect on demand for government price regulation in the literature. So basically these factors are age, gender, wealth, economic expectations, employment, public or state employment, education, and trust. And here we show the effects that are found in the literature. So basically, age would have positive effect on demand for government price control. Gender, females would demand more regulation. Wealth would have negative effect on demand for price control. Economic expectations, positive economic expectations, would have also negative effect. Employment status, employed individuals should have less demand for government price regulation. Employment in state or government-owned enterprise or firm would have positive effect. Education would have negative effect, and general level of trust would also have negative effect. So, in our analysis, we used newly released 22nd wave of RLMS data, which is drawn from around Russia, and we restricted our sample from 15 to 64 years old based on OECD methodology of defining economically active or working population. And in this wave of RLMS data, we have 4 major indicators measuring demand for price control, for demand for government price control. And in particular, we use these variables as answers to the following RLMS question. On the scale from 1 to 10, please indicate to which extent do you agree that prices for food should be determined by government, and this variable we indicate as Y1. Prices for gas and fuel should be determined by government, it's Y2. Prices for utilities should be determined by government, this is Y3. Prices for mortgage should be determined, it should be interest rate for mortgage, should be determined by government, this is Y4. And sum up all 4 indicators, we use a so-called index, which is simply take average of these 4. So this table represents summary statistics on dependence variable we used in our analysis. And as you can see, as I told you in the beginning of the presentation, Russia seems to be highly anti-market because mean values of scores representing the demand for government regulation are about 8.5 out of 10. And of course, index is 8.40. So, as a preliminary step in our analysis, we just decided to compare difference in means by groups, which we simply divided samples by group by gender, presence of higher education, employment status, employment at state-owned or private-owned firm, and working experience, saying that individual who is currently not working, whether or not he ever worked. So we provided differences are mostly all of them are significant at 5% level besides the employment status. And as you can see that females demonstrate 0.06 points higher demand for government price control than males. Individuals with no higher education demonstrate 0.3 points higher demand for government price control, rather those that have higher education, as well as unemployed versus employed individuals also have slightly higher demand for government price control. Also those guys working at state-owned firm also demonstrate 0.12 points higher demand for price control. And for us, surprisingly, those who is currently not working and never worked have lower demand for government price control, rather those who is currently not working but had working experience before. Also, we checked difference in means of demand for government price control, though we presented here just for the last indicator, which is index, which is average of 4 variables that represents demand for government price control. So we check the difference in means by groups, which are the following: 15 to 30, 13 to 45, and 14 to 64. And this is the matrix of differences in means. So basically, this number says that individuals in the age cohort from 31 to 45 demonstrate 0.34 points higher demand for government price control than guys from 15 to 30 years old age cohort. And you can see that there is a sort of tendency that rising the age, we can observe higher demand for government price regulation. Going one step further, we also compared difference in means by wealth status. By the wealth status in this research, we mean, actually not mean, but we use the question when the individual were asked, how long can you live without selling anything in case you lost all your income sources? And to the group 1 belong those individuals who said that they can live without selling anything for half year and more. And respectively to the group 6, those guys who said they cannot survive even 1 day without selling anything if they lose their income. So here you can also see that with decreasing with the decrease of wealth status, individuals demonstrate higher demand for government price control. Basically, they seek for more protection from the state. Going one step further, we want to introduce the concept of relative trust without getting into discussion under which circumstances and whether or not trust would or should have positive or negative effect on demand for state price regulation, because in the literature there are different thoughts and observations that, for instance, Pitlik and Kuba says that social trust is associated with preference for less intensive government intervention only if confidence in government actors is smaller than confidence in business actors. So we introduced the level of the concept of relative trust. The relative trust we simply calculate as difference between trust in small private firms minus trust in small government firms. Just in the RLMS we have the variables which is whereas individuals were asked to which extent do you believe that private firms could be trusted, and the same to which extent do you believe that government small firms could be trusted. So we get into variables of relative trust, difference of trust in small private firms versus trust in small government firms, and relative trust in big companies. Again, trust in big private firms minus trust in big government firms. So this is summary statistics for the set of dependent variables we have in our analysis. So basically this is relative trust, age, and welfare. Welfare we defined as a set of binary variables. We just generate binary variables with respect to classification to which welfare group individuals belong, and use the lowest group as a reference group, saying that everybody here is compared to those who cannot survive without selling anything if they lose their income, and they cannot survive even one day. And as the future expectations, we use the question which individuals in RLMS were addressed in the following manner. So they were asked, to your beliefs, do you think you're going to live better in 12 months? And if individuals say, yes, I'm certain that I will live much better, this is expectation variable x9. And the reference group in this set of binary variables is that when individuals say, I will live much worse. So, going through methods used in the analysis that you can find in our paper. But first of all, we applied ordered logistic regression for each type of demand, denoted by yi, and just simply find the results. Secondly, we applied ordered generalized logistic method procedure to correct for possible heteroscedasticity and for violations of proportional odd assumption. And third, when the proportional odd assumption was found to be violated, we apply also stereotype logistic regression. And finally, to the variable which we denote index, which is the mean of all four types of demands for government regulation, we just applied simple OLS. So, yes, this brings me to the results section, and following the famous phrase of Samuel Bowles, which says, math is like sex, it's very important, but you shouldn't do it in public. I do not provide the whole bulk of huge tables here in my presentation. You can easily find them in our paper. So this table summarizes all the results we are getting. So they're pretty much consistent and could be found in the literature and corroborating the previous results here in Russia, in anti-market Russia. So relative trust, denoted by x1, x2, has negative effects on all dimensions of demand for government trust, the demand for government price regulation. Age have positive effect, welfare status negative, expectation negative, and the presence of higher education has either negative or statistically insignificant effect. Also here, we just denoted some consistency with previous findings remarks. So our results are pretty much consistent with the previous literature and the papers published by big guys. So yes, we are in line with previous studies. So this point brings me to the conclusion. And our conclusion are the following. On average, RLMS respondents show high level of individual demand for government price control. This is the case for all types of goods: food, gas, utilities, and mortgage. Also, I have to point out that food has a little bit lower, comparatively lower demand for government price control, for price control for food. Individual demand for price control increases with age, which is also sounds logically, and it could be found in the literature. And according to our analysis, the individuals in the age cohort between 15 and 30 have demonstrate the lowest level of demand for price control comparing to others. Negative association of demand for government price control with wealth, economic expectations, and educational levels are the presence of higher education was detected in our analysis, and our findings are in line with contemporary literature in the field and contribute to existing state of art, with the empirical evidence from new data set from Russia and wider spectrum of individual demands for government price regulation. And yes, I think that's it. Please, your questions and comments.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions? Can you come back to the trust question?
Yep. Yeah. This one?
How many response options the respondent has?
I believe 10.
10.
Yes. Yes.
Then I have the other question. So you use the as a proxy for welfare of respondents. The question about their how they evaluate their own welfare. Why didn't you use the question about average income for last year or average income for last month?
The thing is that we use not the evaluation of their welfare, but their estimation how long they can last for their savings, for the most liquid savings, without selling anything. And yeah, but why should we use income instead of savings?
You can check, right?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can check that.
Yes, but then their expectations might be, truncated in some sort of ways, and you don't know about it.
Yeah, I do agree with Katya. For example, you have a rich man,
Mhm.
and all your income is on stocks, bonds, like real estate, and once you get fired from the company, and you can live without saying anything, right now, right? You don't have cash actually.
Okay, yeah, we'll check
Or
that.
vice versa, you're very poor, you just can eat like bread for next 7 months.
All right.
Just check correlations.
Yep. Okay, sure. Yeah. Thanks. Anybody else? Yeah.
What is the practical implications of your work? I mean, okay, Jamil's trying to ask for more government regulations, so what? Government policy regulations. So.
We cannot change the gender, right? So we cannot do anything about males and females, right? But some other factors we actually can. For instance, education. If you want to promote market liberal values and decrease the demand for government price regulation, you just can promote better education.
What education? Higher education?
Yeah, higher education, because we use in this analysis we use binary variable of presence of higher education. Yes, please.
Probably I missed something because I still don't understand probably stupid stuff I didn't understand before. Is that some of your characteristics, not yours, but your respondents, they are probably somehow endogenously related to the issue of price control. For example, the decision to go to work for a public company might be somehow correlated with that, because if you vote for more price control, you will probably more like government-oriented guy who will go for the firm, right?
Yeah.
So we don't know what defines sport.
For sure. Yeah.
Same with education, right?
Mhm.
You probably want to be more independent from government, and you go to get a good education to be able to earn money even if the government doesn't support you, right?
Right. You're absolutely right. But at this point, we just do not put to our to-do list to identify the causal relations, and we just want to see if the same predictors which could be found in the literature, the previous literature, still work in Russia, and on this newly released data. For sure, we're gonna do that a little bit later, and as a further step to identify the causality of interdependency of education and preferences, and as you said, going to private or government firm. And yes, for sure, you're right. We are not claiming that for now.
Yes, I have a very brief comment and a question.
Mhm.
The comment is that I prefer to use the reverse order of values in your welfare variable. I mean, to make it easier to understand it. I mean, if you put 1 for the poorest guys and the highest number for the richest ones, I mean, it's more
Yes.
to interpret.
Yes, you're right, but we follow the following logic, like increase in numbers would cause increase in demand for government price regulation, because otherwise we will get minus sign.
It's
Yeah,
easier to interpret the variable.
Yeah, we'll think about it. Yeah, thank you.
And my question
Mhm.
is, again, maybe it's stupid, and I guess people ask you each and every time you use this variable, what does it mean to trust into a firm? I mean, if a respondent trusts the financial sector to banking sector, I guess, this means that the respondent doesn't panic in the times of crisis, for example. But what in practice means that you trust into a big or a small company or whatever
Yeah.
company. You
Okay.
expect better services, higher quality of goods, or you believe it will survive during some crisis, or
We do not know what does it mean for every personal individual. But look, we use this concept of relative trust. And if it goes to trust, so far we cannot prove it, but we think and assume that trust per se is a certain component within this thing, right? And if it's additive, by subtracting this from that, the trust per se would cancel out, and this would be just pure preference to private firm versus government firm, because individual likes it more.
yeah, preferences. What sort of, what type? So
Why do you call this trust, for example?
you trust more to small private firms than to small government firms. What does it mean?
Doesn't mean that if you have chance to go to buy some food, state-owned shop versus privately owned shop, it's your choice.
So you just prefer to
Yes, I mean it could be different meanings. For instance, if it's banking, to which extent you trust.
But it is not trust.
Yeah, the concept of trust is really vague, so we cannot claim that it's really trust. What is?
Why do you decide to call this trust when it is really not trust at all?
It might be trust, but
It's a question of RLMS. So if respondents understand this as trust, we can also understand this as trust. It's a
He's asked to
simple.
say something.
It's
Yeah.
a simple question of RLMS.
Could you say it again? How
About
you interpret
trust.
this question?
What was the question then, maybe?
Trust to this or that company.
Sergiy, please repeat question.
yes, the question in RLMS was addressed in the following way: that to which extent do you believe that privately owned small firms could be trusted?
Can't we interpret that indirectly it's a question about the trust of the government? Because if there is a high expropriation risk from the government, they can like expropriate something from their private firms, which means that you can't trust private firms because of this expropriation risk, right? So somehow the trust to the government and to the private sector is this way might be correlated.
Yeah, it could be, but I am not sure how could be the correlation between the risk of expropriation for you as an individual.
People cannot trust both government and the private. So it's somewhat. It's somewhat.
Why not?
Why not? You may trust no government, no private firm. So
This-
you may trust nobody.
These things are mutually exclusive.
So it's not clear how it will be related. It may be related in some way, but it's not clear how. That's the point.
But it seems to me that you couldn't extract one question from the question when you do not understand exactly what was the whole idea of the question. It was what just Maria said you about that it could be the story about the trust to the government. This means that it is a control question when you try to check whether the previous questions were right and your respondent just have reason to say to answer in this way, and you decided to rely and to use it like a trust in small private firms versus government firms, and this is
Yes, government
really
small.
hard to understand what it's about.
You will never know.
Yeah.
You know.
And it is strange when you just ask the question, what is trust? You say
Sergiy,
it is
can you tell us
something.
how the others use it in the literature? That's the thing, right? So you're trying to compare with Pitlick and Koba and others who've used this question. So you should understand carefully how others have interpreted this question
Okay.
and discussed this, right?
All right. Yeah.
You can't just sort of say because of this.
Mhm.
Try to understand how it fits in. Do they use it the same way? Do they interpret it the same way? Do they discuss the problems?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well,
Just like when we use generalized trust, there's always a question, what does it mean to say, do you trust in people in general? And there's a discussion about this. And people talk about the fact that even though it's inaccurate, it seems to reflect a general feeling. So in the same way, these questions have been used by others. How have they been used by others? How have they discussed? Do you agree with the interpretation of the other literature?
yeah. Okay. Well,
Right? Before you use something, you need to understand how it works in comparison with the literature.
yeah. All right.
Even if it's wrong, right?
Yeah. 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 Sure. For sure.
Okay.
We should be taking more on the table about the concept of trust in firms. Yeah. You're right. Any other questions? Yes, please.
I wanted to ask, I'm not very familiar with the data you use, but
Mhm.
you said it's a 22nd round.
Yeah, it's the for year of 2013.
So I was just wondering, do you have access to previous rounds? So maybe you can check before some structure change or before. So it because there was a question of sort of causation. So I was thinking maybe you could compare something before some structure change and after structure change. Maybe the respondents differ, and maybe you could sort of get an idea.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and we would love to do that if we would have this very similar questions in the previous rounds. We had some questions about demand for price control in the year 2006, but the question was addressed in the binary way. Do you believe that market or state should define prices for gas? And for now we have it in 10-point scale.
So I don't know how, maybe.
We just still didn't figure out how can we compare them in the correct way, if we can at all.
Any more questions?
I just have a comment related to the literature review.
Mhm.
Maybe it would also make sense to have a look how do other authors define welfare. Maybe this subjective dimension also enters the welfare in terms of how people feel dependent from the market. So can they survive without entering market during some period, either because they have savings or because they have a social network and support. So this kind of subjective understanding. And maybe also the objectives and objective measures and components related to their salaries or incomes.
Mhm. Thank you. I think it's a good point to think about it. Yeah, thank you. Uh-huh.
I also want to come back to the question about the previous literature. I mean, the previous RLMS. So even though the earlier one was binary, couldn't you at least do the following? Look at everybody who answered 0. That, you shouldn't have, say, government regulation. And look at everyone who answered 1. And then look at their average scores here.
Mhm.
And then you can graph their average scores, and you can compare the lowest score of all the ones. Let's say the ones, are average 9, and the zeros are average 3, or are the zeros average? And what's the distribution of the overlap? Right? For instance, we would expect someone who's against government regulation wouldn't answer. There would be 9 here, right? If it's binary, it's 0 or 1.
In some way it's possible.
Yeah.
Somewhere, well, that's we would like to see.
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
It would be useful. One way to see consistency is to simply look at the distribution.
Mhm.
Since we know what the people who answered 0 answered now.
We can also dichotomize this scale.
Right,
1 to
but like I
10,
sort of said,
we
just
can
look for the
convert
exact
it to-
people who answered 0. What did they answer this time? For the people who answered 1, what did they answer this time? And then look at that distribution. You can look at the distribution of all the answers for everyone who answered 1. Look at the distribution for all the answers, everyone who answered 0.
Yes, we can try to do that, but I'm not sure if the intersection of 15th and 22nd wave would be really high, but we can check it at least.
I mean, you must have a few hundred there to say. Right?
Yeah, it should be. Yeah.
Try.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Yes, please.
Once you're looking for different characteristics of people and how they correlate with price control attitude, I would check their army service, whether the person was in the army or not. There's some bias in the group of people who were taken to the army service, but anyway, it's quite interesting controlling for this bias to check whether like spending 2 or 3 or 4 years in the army change people's attitude toward the role of government.
Yeah, for sure we'll check. I'm sure we have data about army service, but I'm not sure if we have about duration. But anyway, we can check. Yeah, thank you.
But not only that, if you can, I didn't know you had army service. If you can check that, since you have 2006, you have some people answering who answered before they entered the army.
Yep.
And you have some people who are answering after they entered the army. Can you compare?
Yeah, because next week there is a seminar in New York, because there is a paper on how the army service affects the health of people. So
Okay.
definitely they should have data on both before and after army service to check that, right?
And you could look at all their answers. That's very good. That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Right? Let's say there's only 200 people or 100 people even who were in the army in between.
In between of 2 points, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, but the major issue again we have about comparing this.
No, but
yeah.
even if this one, again, just you want the solution.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
the other thing is, other questions are the same, right? So basically for all the questions that are the same, compare the answers before and after. It might be very interesting.
Yep. Yeah, thank you.
Or you can do the same thing with university. People who are under 18 in 06, right? Because they have some teenagers.
Yes,
right?
they do. Yes.
So you can do before they went to university and after they went to university.
But in this way, we'll have high sample truncation because of construction of RLMS, they might lose those who went for studying.
To what?
From household, and they will just simply will not. The huge fraction of those who went for university just drop out from the RLMS question.
But like I said, if you did too many, drop out, useless. But if you get 100, it's not crazy to compare, right?
Yeah, sure, you're right. Anybody else?
Okay, so no more questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you.